She received that invitation, and in that instant, everything she knew ceased to exist. 100 women were summoned to win the most powerful man in the kingdom. But she would do anything not to be chosen. While all of them fought for a crown, she was hiding a secret and a love that could destroy her. But what no one expected was that she would be the one to catch the Alpha King's attention. And when his gaze met hers, there was no choice, no escape. Because in that moment, fate decided for them. Amid power games, betrayal, and desire, she is about to discover that running away can be even more dangerous than staying, and that sometimes, the man you try the hardest to avoid is exactly the one destined to claim you. The envelope was sitting on the living room table when Clarice got home. She knew before she even opened it. The scarlet wax seal bearing the crown of Domburton left no room for doubt. She stood there for a moment, staring at it, as if not touching it might somehow change what it was. No, that can't be, but it was. Her fingers carefully broke the seal, and the words on the paper hit her one by one. By order of the Royal Council of the Kingdom of Domburton. Lady Clarice Vane is hereby summoned. She stopped reading. She placed the paper on the table, took a deep breath, picked it up again. To participate in the season of the chosen, at the castle of Domburton, beginning with the next full moon cycle. 100 ladies had been summoned. 100, and she was one of them. I don't want this. There wasn't a single line in the invitation that said, "You may decline," because that wasn't an option. The Royal Council didn't send invitations. They sent orders wrapped in flowers. Every year, the Kingdom of Domburton held its most anticipated event, a grand royal mating ball, where human nobles and shifter nobles from every region gathered under the watchful eyes of the court. Alliances were formed, families rose in status, destinies were sealed in a single season. Clarice had known about it since childhood. She had grown up hearing about it. But that year was different. It wasn't just about alliances or family interests. It was the season in which the Alpha King himself would choose his queen. 100 ladies summoned for a rigorous selection, observed in every gesture, every word, every reaction, all to prove they were worthy of standing beside the throne in the most powerful position in the kingdom. And there was more at stake than just a title or a crown. The chosen one's family would immediately rise within the nobility, lands, wealth, direct influence over the kingdom's decisions. It was the kind of shift that could turn an ordinary name into one of the most powerful in Domburton overnight. During the season, nobles also had the chance to choose their future mates. Ladies who were not selected by the king could still be courted by influential men of the court, even members of the royal guard. But they all wanted the same thing. They all wanted to be chosen by him, because becoming the Alpha King's Luna meant power, status, and a destiny impossible to ignore. Clarice closed her eyes. And I'm one of the 100. She found him on the castle's hidden staircase before night fully fell. Matthew was leaning against the cold stone with his arms crossed. The uniform of the Lupine Royal Guard was still on him, dark leather, the crest of Domburton on his left shoulder. But his eyes, when he saw her approaching, were just his. He opened his arms without saying a word. Clarice stepped into that space like someone coming home after a storm. His chest was solid, familiar, and for a second she almost managed to pretend the invitation didn't exist. But it did. "I've been summoned," she said, her voice muffled in his coat. Matthew went still. She felt his muscles tense slightly, his breathing pause for a moment before returning to normal. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He'd been in the Royal Guard for years. He knew exactly what that invitation meant. He knew better than anyone what happened inside that castle during the season. Clarice pulled back just enough to look at him. "I can't refuse," she continued. "But that doesn't change anything between us. She held his face in both hands. "I promise. I'll go through it, and then I'll come back to you." Matthew stayed quiet for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. Then slowly, he laced his fingers with hers. "Then remember this," he said, his voice low and rough. "No matter what happens in there, you're still mine." "I always have been," she replied. He brought her hands to his lips. Clarice closed her eyes. "I'll come back. I promise I will." In the morning, 3 firm knocks on the door. "Clarice." Lady Isoud's voice came from the hallway with the precision of a bell marking the hour. "It's time. You need to prepare for the initial presentation of the season of The Chosen." Clarice opened her eyes slowly. Light slipped through the curtain. The room was quiet. "Come in," she said, without strength. The door opened. Lady Isoud stepped in with her usual posture, back straight, chin lifted, her eyes scanning the room as if assessing property. Clarice sat up in bed. "I don't want to do this." Her voice came out low, but steady. "I don't want to get married. I don't want to be trapped inside a castle for the rest of my life." Isoud watched her for a moment. And something happened that Clarice didn't expect. For a fleeting instant, before her mother's composure snapped back into place, there was something in her eyes. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. "I know," Isoud replied softly. But then her expression hardened. "Even so, you've been summoned. And there are things, my daughter, that are not choices." She paused. "If you are chosen, it changes everything. For you. For our family. For the name we carry." Clarice didn't respond. Isoud placed a dress on the bed. It was stunning. Green silk, embroidered sleeves, the kind of piece made to be admired from afar. Then she left without further ceremony. Clarice stood there for a moment. Then she got up, walked to the small desk in the corner of the room, and opened the bottom drawer. Inside, between a folded handkerchief and a notebook, was a small dark glass vial. She picked it up, opened the lid, and immediately turned her face away. The smell was awful. A mix of fermented herbs she had prepared with great care and very clear intent. The idea was simple. No one who came near her would stay for long. She stared at the vial for a moment. Then she closed it, slipped it carefully into a discreet fold of the dress, far from her nose. The great hall of the castle of Domburton was exactly the kind of place designed to make people feel small. High ceilings, carved stone columns, the kingdom's banners hanging above. The 100 ladies were arranged in rows throughout the hall, each dressed in the finest their families could offer, each fully aware they were being watched. Clarice stood in the last row. She studied the room carefully, measuring distances. The other ladies spoke in low voices, exchanged calculated smiles, adjusted their posture whenever they felt eyes on them. Some were genuinely beautiful. Others radiated the confidence of those raised for this exact moment. Clarice took the vial from its hiding place, opened it, applied it to strategic points, closed it. The effect was gradual and deeply satisfying. The nearest ladies began to wrinkle their noses. One shifted subtly to the side, then another, then 2 more. Within minutes, there was a noticeable space around Clarice that no one willingly occupied. She stayed there, at the end of the hall, with space around her, and her eyes fixed on nothing in particular, waiting for it all to be over. Caspian entered the hall through the side gallery. He hadn't wanted any of this. The season, the selection, the 100 ladies lined up as if marriage were a competition to be won. But his mother's voice still echoed in his memory. "You need a queen, Caspian, and I won't live forever." And the council had turned it into a decree before he had time to come up with a decent argument. So there he was, seated among the nobles, watching the line of women smiling at him, They stepped forward, curtsied, said their names, exchanged polite words. Some were indeed impressive. He could recognize that, even without interest. One had eyes that held attention. Another had a voice that carried natural authority. Another had the kind of posture that suggested she had never stumbled once in her life. But then his gaze reached the end of the hall. Why is no one standing near her? The last in line was completely isolated. No ladies on either side, no side conversations, no one approaching. Just her, standing with an almost irritating calm, as if the empty space around her was exactly where she preferred to be. Curious. When it was her turn, Caspian straightened slightly. She walked forward, and that was when he noticed. Oh. The smell reached him before she did. Caspian went completely still for a second, processing it. It was undeniable. There was something very wrong, from an olfactory standpoint, about that woman. But there was something else too, something his instinct picked up beneath it, something he couldn't quite name yet, and that settled quietly in the back of his mind, waiting. She stopped at the proper distance, curtsied with a fluid grace that didn't match the rest of the situation, and said her name. Clarice Vane, my lord. She smiled. It wasn't a calculated smile meant to please. It was the smile of someone making a tremendous effort to appear normal, while wishing she were anywhere else in the world. Caspian looked at her for a second longer than necessary. She came to a royal selection. Without bathing? Or did she do that on purpose? The presentations ended. The ladies were dismissed to circulate through the castle and gardens. Caspian remained seated for a few more minutes, responding to the nobles' greetings. Clarice left the hall as soon as she could. Even she was starting to struggle with the smell. The vial had done its job a little too well. She needed to get to her quarters, change clothes, and breathe air that didn't make her eyes water. The problem was that she didn't know the castle. Clarice walked down 2 corridors, went down 1 staircase, up half another, tried 3 different doors, and came to the conclusion that either the castle had been designed by someone with a cruel sense of humor, or she simply had no sense of direction. She turned a corner and stopped. Caspian was standing in the corridor ahead of her. For a fraction of a second, they just looked at each other. Sorry, she said automatically, stepping aside. I'm sorry to bother you, Your Majesty. I was looking for the exit and got lost, so I'll... Wait. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the kind of weight that didn't require volume to make someone stop. Clarice stopped. Caspian crossed his arms and tilted his head slightly, with an expression she couldn't immediately place. There was something between genuine curiosity and amusement at her expense. Did you do that to get my attention? He asked. Or do you simply not like bathing? The tone was dry, but there was a spark in his eyes that made it worse. With all due respect, Your Majesty, she said, with a calm that cost her considerable effort. To assume I did this to get your attention is... presumptuous. Presumptuous. Very. He raised an eyebrow. Then what was it? I don't want anyone disturbing my peace, she said, with all the honesty the situation allowed. And marriage is not what I want. She held his gaze. My heart already belongs to someone. There was silence. Caspian looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. It wasn't anger. It wasn't quite surprise either. It was closer to someone who had just received unexpected information and was still deciding what to do with it. I see, he said slowly. He paused briefly. And what if I wanted to claim you? Clarice felt her stomach drop. That would be my worst nightmare, she answered before common sense could intervene. She turned and started walking away. Behind her, Caspian let out a low sound that was clearly a laugh. She clenched her teeth. Lady Clarice. His voice reached her before she turned the corner. There was something different in the tone now. She stopped, but didn't turn around. You cannot go around declaring you want another man while participating in a selection to become my future queen. A calculated pause. If someone from the council hears that, you won't just be disqualified. You'll be a disgrace to your family. Another pause. So wait until the season ends, then say whatever you want. Clarice stood there for a moment. Then she walked away without answering. But his words followed her down the entire corridor.
She found her quarters by accident half an hour later, following a servant who, fortunately, was heading in the right direction. She changed clothes. The smell was gone. She sat on the edge of the bed with her hands in her lap, staring at the window for a long time. The summoned ladies were entitled to quarters inside the castle, an entire wing reserved just for them. The castle of Domburton was vast enough to accommodate not only the 100 chosen, but also nobles from every region of the kingdom. Presumptuous, she thought, thinking I did that because of him. The chambers Clarice occupied in the castle were far too beautiful to be a prison. That was how she thought of that room, with its wide bed, heavy curtains, and the window overlooking the gardens below. Too beautiful. Too quiet. Too far removed from everything that was hers. 3 days had passed since the initial presentation, and Clarice had already figured out the unspoken rules of that place. Every meal was a test. Every walk through the gardens, an evaluation. The ladies moved through the halls with that practiced lightness of those who knew there were eyes in every corner. And there were. Members of the council appeared in corridors without warning. Ladies of the court observed from afar with neutral expressions that fooled no one. Even the servants seemed to carry some kind of invisible report. It was as if every pair of eyes that landed on them carried a vote. And whoever gathered the most by the end, won. It wasn't enough to be beautiful. It wasn't enough to have a respectable name or a family with land. The kingdom didn't want a queen who smiled too much at the wrong noble, who spoke too loudly in a quiet hall, who let her enthusiasm slip at the wrong moment. Reputation weighed just as much as a surname, sometimes more. A lady who lost her composure in a trivial conversation or showed too much interest in any man who wasn't the Alpha King could see her standing crumble before the end of the week. It didn't matter whether she was a shifter or human. The standards were the same for all. Some had already formed groups, small alliances. Others competed with a subtlety only the observant could notice. A directed smile, a well-placed remark, the calculated gesture of positioning themselves near the right people. Clarice did neither. She walked alone, spoke when necessary, and silently counted the days. How much longer? She was leaning against the window when she saw the group of guards changing shifts in the courtyard below. Her eyes swept over the dark uniforms almost absent-mindedly, and then stopped. Matthew was among them. She stepped away from the window before anyone could notice she'd been looking. Her heart skipped for a moment. I just need to talk to him. The opportunity came the following afternoon. The ladies had been released into the gardens during the mildest hours of the day, and Clarice used that with intention. She knew the tall hedges on the east wing. She had passed by them the day before, and noticed they formed a natural corridor, out of the direct line of sight from the main hall windows. She arrived first, stood waiting between the leaves with her hands clasped, listening to the quiet around her. Footsteps. Matthew turned the corner with the ease of someone simply making his rounds and stopped in front of her. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then he glanced around, confirmed they were alone, and the tension in his shoulders eased slightly. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low. "I am," she said. "Just tired of all this." He nodded slowly. There was something in the way he stood. His eyes fixed somewhere between her and the ground, his fingers adjusting the sleeve of his uniform for no reason. "What was the king saying to you?" he asked, without lifting his gaze. In the corridor, after the presentations. I saw you two. Clarice felt a slight tightness in her chest. He showed me the way to the chambers, she said lightly. I got lost. Matthew didn't respond immediately. That's all? That's all. He nodded again, but there was something in that silence she couldn't name. He's seeing all of this up close. And it's hurting him, she thought. She stepped closer. Matthew, look at me. He raised his eyes slowly. I'm not giving in to any invitation, she said firmly. No glances, no dances, nothing. You are the love of my life. That doesn't change just because I'm inside this castle. Something flickered across his face, too fast for her to catch. I know, he said. But his eyes had already dropped again. The dining hall was different that night. The tables had been arranged in long rows, with fine china and tall candles. This was the first official test of the season, a meal where the ladies would demonstrate education, elegance, and intelligence in conversation with the nobles of the court. Clarice entered with the others and scanned the room. There was exactly one empty seat, at the end of the table, isolated. The nearest ladies had subtly shifted away, leaving a space no one was willing to fill. The first day's scent had made an impression. She walked to the chair without hurry and sat down. The conversation around her flowed in different tones. Nobles exchanging opinions about the year's harvest, about northern territories, about the kingdom's latest hunting expedition. Clarice listened without participating, her head slightly lowered, fingers brushing the rim of her glass. Just let this end. But then she felt it, that sensation of being watched. She lifted her face slowly. Across the hall, among the nobles seated in places of honor, Caspian was looking at her. Their eyes met. She didn't look away. Neither did he. It was a servant placing dishes on the table that broke it. The sound of porcelain, movement all around, and suddenly the world had other people in it again. Clarice looked down at her plate, then looked up again. Caspian was still watching. Stop looking at me. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a noble approaching, walking toward the empty chair beside her, with the hesitation of someone still deciding whether it was worth it. Clarice looked at her plate, then at her hand, and made a decision. She picked up a piece of meat with her fingers. The noble stopped mid-step, stood there for a second, staring at her, then turned and went to sit somewhere else. From where he sat, Caspian saw everything. The laugh wasn't loud. Brief, genuine, completely out of place in that hall full of formality. He stood still for a moment afterward, as if his own surprise had caught him off guard. How long has it been since I laughed like that? He couldn't explain it, not even to himself. There were 100 ladies in that hall, each doing exactly what was expected of them, and this one was eating with her hands in the middle of a formal test dinner, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He stood up. The entire hall stilled, not all at once. It moved like a wave. One head turning, then another, until the general murmur gave way to silence. Caspian walked between the tables without haste and stopped beside the empty chair. He sat. Clarice stared at her plate for a second longer than she should have. "What do you think you're doing?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper, lips hardly moving. "How dare you speak to the Alpha King like that?" He replied in the same volume. She blinked. Breathed. "I apologize, Your Majesty." A brief pause. "Even so, why didn't you stay where you were?" "Because I was watching you eat like an animal," he said calmly, "and thought it best to sit closer in case you choked." Clarice turned her head toward him slowly. "You're rude. And you're at an elegance test eating with your hands." She opened her mouth. "He's not wrong. but she wasn't going to admit that out loud under any circumstances. "Whatever," she said, picking up her fork with delayed dignity. Caspian remained silent for a moment, his eyes sweeping the hall with the ease of someone exactly where he belonged. Then, almost as if commenting on the weather, he said, "You're looking for someone." Clarice lifted her gaze. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking forward, at the table, at nothing in particular. But there was something in the angle of his face that made it clear the statement hadn't been casual. "I'm not," she said. "You are." He turned his head slightly, just enough for their eyes to meet from the corner. "Ever since I sat down." She didn't answer, and that was answer enough. Caspian let his gaze drift calmly across the hall. The guards along the sides, the nobles at the tables, the dark uniform by the right wall. There. The guard stood in perfect posture, eyes forward. But Caspian knew his guards. And that one wasn't truly looking ahead. He was looking at the table where Clarice sat. "It's him." Caspian said nothing. He kept his face neutral, fingers lightly touching the glass, and stored the information where he kept things that required time. Dinner continued. When the dishes were cleared and the meal came to an end, Clarice stood, turned to Caspian, and curtsied, with a composure she had gathered from every remaining corner of her dignity. "It was a pleasure to dine beside you, Your Majesty." He inclined his head. She leaned slightly closer, her voice nearly non-existent. "Next time, stay in your place," and walked away. Caspian stood still for a moment, then exhaled slowly through his nose, the corner of his mouth lifting without permission. This woman. The hall gradually emptied. Caspian stayed until the end. He fulfilled everything with the patience he had learned to cultivate over the years, said what needed to be said, listened to what needed to be heard. When the last guest left, he took the east wing toward the library. There was a book he had been reading for 3 weeks, and he intended to finish it before the season ended. It was the only thing that still felt entirely his in those days. An hour before sleep with a book and absolute silence. He pushed open the library door and stopped. The sound came before the image, low voices, a whisper, something that didn't belong in that place at that hour. Caspian stepped deeper between the shelves, following the sound with silent steps, and turned the last row of books. A lady, one of the guards. They both jumped apart the moment they noticed him. The lady's face flushed, eyes wide, hands trying to fix what their encounter had disheveled. The guard stepped back, straightened his uniform, and stood still with the expression of someone who knew exactly how much trouble he was in. Caspian looked at them both for a moment. "My lady," he said, with a calm that was worse than anger. "You may leave the castle tonight." The lady opened her mouth. "Your Majesty, A lady participating in the selection cannot be involved with any man until the chosen one is announced." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "That is the rule." "You knew it." He turned his gaze to the guard. "And you." A brief pause. "Remove your uniform." "Your Majesty." The guard stepped forward, his voice tense but controlled. "I understand the weight of what I've done, and I won't try to justify it. But I ask, with everything I have, for one last chance." The lady didn't hesitate. She dropped to her knees right there, hands clasped. "Please, Your Majesty, don't let him pay for this alone. It was both our mistake." Her voice faltered slightly. "He is one of the best you have. The entire kingdom knows it." The guard knelt beside her. "Years serving this kingdom," he said, head bowed. "I have never failed. One mistake should not erase everything. I only ask that you do not take this from me." Caspian remained silent. He knew his worth. He knew he was one of the finest shifters in the Lupine Royal Guard. "Both of you, stand." They obeyed slowly. "If this happens again," Caspian said, his voice low and final, "you will not just lose your uniform. You will lose your right to live in this kingdom." He paused. "And you," his gaze shifted to the lady, "will lose any chance of being courted by any noble of this court." He left without looking back, before either of them could say anything more. The knock on the door came before the sun had fully risen. Caspian opened his eyes in the darkness of the room and stayed still for a second, expecting some urgent matter of the kingdom. "Your Majesty." The counselor's voice came from the other side. "The council requests your presence." He closed his eyes for one more second. "I'm coming." There were 4 of them seated at the table when he walked in. 4 expressions carrying the same message before anyone even spoke. Caspian sat down, crossed his arms, and waited. "Your Majesty," the eldest began. Lord Edmund with the tone of someone about to say something obvious for the 10th time. "The season is advancing. The ladies are here. Their purpose is to be known by you. I have attended every required event." "Attended, yes." Edmund steepled his fingers. "But you must circulate. Speak with them. Walk through the gardens with them. Show genuine interest. The council is watching, and the families are watching, and I understand." "Your Majesty, I understand." There was a brief silence. "This afternoon," Caspian said, standing, "I'll walk through the gardens. Satisfied?" Edmund opened his mouth, closed it, inclined his head. Caspian left before anyone could think of adding anything else. The afternoon arrived with clear skies and a group of ladies who looked like they had rehearsed the moment. They appeared from the gardens the moment he stepped down the stairs. Caspian moved among them with the patience his position required, answering questions, asking the right ones, letting silence fall where it should. Inside, the thought was different. "I need some of them disqualified soon. I can't take this much longer." One of them talked non-stop about her family's estate in the north. Another laughed at everything he said with almost touching dedication. A third had mentioned the weather 4 times in 10 minutes. He was responding to something about the harvest, or pretending to, because he wasn't actually listening anymore, when movement in the inner corridor caught his attention. A figure walking alone through the gallery that overlooked the garden. Clarice. She moved with that distracted lightness of someone lost in thought, her eyes toward the windows, completely unaware that the king was less than 30 steps away, surrounded by ladies who would give anything to be in her place. Caspian turned to the group. "Excuse me." He didn't wait for their reaction. He walked toward the gallery with the steps of someone who knew exactly where he was going. Clarice saw him too late to pretend she hadn't. "Lady Clarice," he said. "Your Majesty." She inclined her head. "Can I help you with something?" "Actually," he took a step closer, "I was thinking about you." She raised an eyebrow. "What an honor." "Yes, isn't it?" His tone was dry, but there was that spark she already recognized. "I was thinking about how bold you are for someone in your position, declaring you want another man, using herbs to try to mask your scent." He tilted his head slightly. "Creative, at least." Clarice felt heat rise up her neck. "I wasn't trying to mask your scent from me?" He let out a quiet laugh. "Clarice." The way he said her name made her uncomfortable. It sounded far too familiar. "Don't underestimate me. I'm the Alpha King. You could cover yourself in every herb in the kingdom and I would still catch your essence from a distance." The heat spread from her neck to her entire face. She tried to gather a response that sounded like control. She started. "You're blushing," he observed calmly. "I'm not." "You are." Clarice closed her mouth with effort, breathed, lifted her chin. He went quiet for a second. His eyes settled on her with a different kind of attention, not the king evaluating a candidate, something else. "You think you're the only one who gets to provoke here, Clarice?" he said, his voice low, almost amused. He paused, then stepped closer, not too fast, not abruptly, just enough for the space between them to disappear. Clarice didn't step back, but her heart raced before she could stop it. His voice came warm, low, right at her ear. "If you provoke, you'll be provoked. You don't get to provoke the Alpha King and walk away untouched. Don't forget who you're speaking to." Clarice went completely still. Her fingers tightened at the side of her dress without permission. He pulled back, the corner of his mouth lifting. "So now you know. Tonight at the ball, you'll have a dance with me, and you don't get to say no." Clarice felt a thin line of sweat slide down her temple. She opened her mouth. "I don't know how to dance, Your Majesty," she said quickly. "I can't do that without what?" His eyes narrowed slightly. That glint she already knew was the worst possible sign. "You only know how to do that with someone else?" She froze. "You're not allowed to have anyone yet," he continued before she could answer. "So don't worry about it." A pause. "And I'll teach you to dance, you little liar." He turned and walked away. Clarice stood in the corridor for a moment after he left. Her heart still out of rhythm, and for a second, just one, she thought she might be going too far. He was the Alpha King. She was in his castle, part of his selection, and she had spent the last few days provoking him with a boldness that, from the outside, would probably look like madness. But then his words came back. Little liar. The anger rose slowly, clean and familiar. The audacity. The hall was full. Highlights, soft music still warming up the musicians. Nobles from every family moving with that elegance that looked natural, but had taken years to master. The ladies of the selection were spread across the hall like carefully arranged flowers. Caspian was standing near the entrance when she walked in. He wasn't expecting to be hit like that. Clarice crossed into the hall with that same distracted grace she carried, as if she didn't fully realize how much attention she drew, or did and had chosen not to care. The dark blue dress, her hair falling over one side, her eyes scanning the room with a caution she probably thought she was hiding. Caspian stood still. Gods. His heart raced, and it irritated him in a way he couldn't explain. He had seen extraordinarily beautiful women in that hall over the years. He had been introduced to queens from other kingdoms, to ladies raised specifically to impress, to shifters whose beauty carried something almost supernatural. And there he was, heart pounding because of a woman who had shown up to her presentation smelling like fermented herbs and had eaten meat with her hands at a formal dinner. You're in trouble, he thought to himself. Across the hall, Clarice finally found him with her eyes. Clarice felt her chest tighten instantly. He was dressed in black, the kingdom's crest on his shoulder, and there was something about the way he stood, that particular stillness of someone who didn't need to move to own the space, that made it hard to look anywhere else. Stop. Stop now. She forced her gaze away, scanning the guards lined along the walls, looking for one in particular. Matthew was there. She knew it. Just get through this. Matthew will understand. But then Caspian moved. He crossed the hall toward her with those unhurried steps, and the effect was immediate. Heads turning, conversations pausing, a silence opening like water before a stone. He stopped in front of her and extended his hand. Clarice looked at his hand, then at him. There's no way out. She placed her hand in his. The entire hall stopped breathing. She heard it, couldn't help it. The whisper spreading among the nearest nobles. He chose her first, The one who doesn't bathe. The one who ate with her hands. There was genuine confusion in those voices, and Clarisse felt her face heat. But Caspian led the first steps with such effortless ease, it was almost infuriating. "Breathe," he murmured, just for her. The music shifted into something slower, wider, and other couples began joining the floor around them. The hall came back to life. Clarisse focused on the steps, on his shoulders, on anything that wasn't the heat of his hand at her waist. There was something inexplicably warm about it. It wasn't the room. It wasn't the effort of the dance. It was him. His closeness stirring something inside her in a way she couldn't name, and didn't want to name. "Stop." She stepped on his foot. Caspian froze for half a second. "Why?" he asked, his tone far too neutral to be genuine. "Because your majesty is far too showy," she said, low but firm. "Now everyone will think you're going to choose me." "I'm doing you a favor," he said, resuming the steps as if nothing had happened. "You don't want anyone disturbing your peace, remember? No one will approach a woman the king has taken to dance." He's not wrong, which only made it more annoying. "You're not all that," she said. "I'm not?" "You're not." He pulled her slightly closer, just enough to throw her argument off balance. "You're going to beg for me yet," he said with absurd calm. Clarisse laughed, short, genuinely mocking. "In your dreams." But the warmth was still there, growing slowly, uninvited, completely indifferent to what she wanted or didn't want to feel. "Stop. Stop now. You love Matthew." That was when she saw him. Matthew stood against the right wall, uniform in place, posture perfect, but his eyes were on her. Fixed. She tried to pull away from Caspian. His hand tightened at her waist. "Don't go there," he said quietly. "I just want—" "Not now, Clarisse." There was something in his tone, not an order. Something else. Restraint, as if he were holding something back that didn't belong in that hall. She looked at him. Caspian's gaze flicked to Matthew for a fraction of a second, so quick she almost missed it. Then back to her, and there was something in his eyes she couldn't identify. "What is it?" she asked. "Not now." The thought crossed his mind with cold clarity. Not here. She wouldn't handle it. She'd break down in front of the entire council, all the families, the whole hall. "Nothing," he said. "Caspian, everyone is watching, Clarisse." His voice was low, direct. "Walking away now draws attention you don't want. The council is watching." A pause. "Don't be foolish." She held her breath. Then she looked at him, really looked at him. Not with her usual irritation, not with the defense that had become automatic. Really looked. And for a second she hadn't planned, she realized. His eyes. She forced the thought out of her head. "I need to go," she said firmly, "when the music ends." The music ended 30 seconds later. Clarisse curtsied with all the composure she had left. Caspian inclined his head. Their eyes held for a second longer, and then she turned and walked away. She moved through the corridors calling Matthew's name under her breath, her heart beating in a rhythm that wasn't romance. It was urgency. A need to see his face and remember why she was there, why she had promised, why any of this was worth it. The garden was quiet when she arrived. She saw him from behind, and stopped. There was a woman, his arms around her, the kiss that left no room for interpretation. The world simply stopped. "Matthew." The name came out weak, broken, as if her voice understood before she did the weight of what she was seeing. He turned slowly. And when his eyes met hers, wide, his face shifting through a sequence of expressions she saw all of and wished she hadn't seen any, Clarice understood there was no version of this that wasn't exactly what it looked like. "It's not what it looks like," he said, taking a step toward her. The woman in his arms didn't rush to pull away. She slipped free slowly, with that specific calm of someone who has nothing to hide because she doesn't care about the damage she's about to cause. She turned to Clarice with a smile that held nothing kind in it. "With me," she said, her voice soft and poisonous. "He has what you'll never give him." "Shut up," Matthew said, tense. She ignored him, took a step toward Clarice, her smile widening. "Oh, darling, everyone knows you're a virgin. I said shut up." But it was too late. The words hit Clarice like something physical. She stood there, unable to move, unable to breathe properly, while the woman walked away through the garden without a trace of urgency, without looking back, as if she had just done exactly what she came to do. The silence left behind was deafening. Clarice had saved herself for him. All those years, every time there was pressure, every time someone tried to court her, every time the world pushed her in a different direction, she had chosen to wait. For him. Because she believed he was worth waiting for. And now she was being exposed in a garden by a stranger with a venomous smile. The tears started falling before she decided to let them. "I can't believe you did this to me." Her voice broke halfway through, wounded in a way she couldn't hide. "Clarice." Matthew took another step. "Listen to me, please." She didn't step back. She stood still, eyes full, hands clenched at the sides of her dress. He dropped to his knees. "I'm begging you." His voice was desperate, his hands reaching for hers. "I love you. You're everything to me. It was a mistake. It was horrible, I know. But you're all I have, Clarice. Please." She looked at him kneeling at her feet for a long moment. Then she yanked her hand away. "You're ridiculous." Something shifted in his face. It was fast. So fast she almost missed it. The desperation retreated, and what took its place wasn't regret. He stood up slowly. "Stop the drama," he said, his voice completely different now. "I saw you showing off for the king tonight." His eyes narrowed. "What did you do with him, huh?" "Nothing. Nothing." He laughed, and the sound was cruel in a way she had never heard from him before. "Clarice, you're going to introduce me as your future mate to your parents when all this is over." A loaded pause. "Or I'll make sure the entire kingdom knows who you really are." She stared at him. "This is the man I loved." "You're spoiled," he continued, his voice rising slightly. "Useless. You never knew what you had. You're a pig." The words came out low, steady, without trembling, without drama. Caspian had been standing in the shadows of the garden long enough to hear every word. He had left the hall a few minutes after her. He stayed still as everything unfolded. His eyes were no longer entirely human. Golden tones pulsed in the darkness, and there was a fury in his chest that he was holding back with both hands, because unleashing it right there, in that moment, wouldn't help her. Every humiliation, every word carefully chosen to hurt. Clarice noticed his presence too late. When their eyes met for a fraction of a second, he saw it. The shame. The tears she was trying to wipe away too quickly with the back of her hand. The face of someone who had been exposed in a place where she hadn't protected herself, because she never thought she would need to. She ran, disappeared between the trees before he could say anything. Caspian stood still for a moment, his eyes following the direction she had taken. Then he turned slowly. Matthew was still in the garden, trying to recover his composure, muttering something to himself. When he noticed the king's presence, he turned and froze. Caspian said nothing at first. He remained where he was, with that stillness that was worse than any shout, the golden glow in his eyes not yet fully gone. Your Majesty, I can explain. In the library, Caspian said, his voice low and dangerous. I gave you a chance. A pause. You used it for this. It was a mistake, I swear. From this night forward, Caspian said, without raising his voice, without needing to, you are banished from the kingdom of Domburton. Matthew opened his mouth. The guard stepped out of the shadows before he could form another word. 2 shifters from the royal guard, silent and ready, waiting only for the signal. Your Majesty, please. Matthew's voice broke. Years of service. I'm begging you. Caspian stepped closer, slowly, until the distance between them left no doubt about what was being said. If you dare to defame that woman, he said, so quietly it was almost intimate, even once, anywhere in this kingdom or beyond, you won't live long enough to repeat it. Matthew didn't answer. The guards took him away. Caspian stood alone in the garden for a moment. Then he began removing his clothes. The shift came quickly. Bones realigning, his lupine form replacing the human one with the ease of someone who had done it countless times. In seconds, there was only the wolf among the trees, large and silent, muzzle lifted to the night air. Her scent was there. He went after it. The forest was dense at that hour, and she had gone deep into it. Caspian followed the trail with the patience of a predator who knew he had time. There was no urgency, only direction. Her scent was unmistakable to him, always had been. From the very first moment she stepped into that hall carrying the stench of fermented herbs. And yet beneath it all he had sensed something he couldn't ignore. He found her at the edge of a cliff, standing there, looking down, shoulders slightly drawn inward, her loose hair falling over one side, hands clasped in front of her. He shifted back a few steps behind her, silent, swift, and approached slowly. Clarice. She didn't turn, but her shoulders lifted slightly, her breathing changing. I know tonight was the worst night of your life, he said, stopping beside her. So you don't need to say anything. Tonight is bad, he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. But there will be better days. She turned her face to him, her eyes red, something between anger and exhaustion in them. You can't promise that. Yes, I can. He kept his gaze forward, toward the valley below. Do you know how many times I've felt alone in that castle and thought foolish things? A pause. And the next day the sun rose, and it was a better day. He looked at her. Don't lose the chance to see a beautiful sunrise tomorrow because of one man who doesn't deserve your tears. Clarice stayed silent for a moment. Then the tears came again. Different this time. Not anger, not shame. Something deeper. When I saw you, he said more quietly, my days got better. She looked at him. And it was the first time she looked at him like that. Without defense, without irony, without that layer of distance she always kept between them. She simply looked. Then she smiled, small and broken, tears still on her face. You don't understand, she said, her voice tired. He's my mate. Caspian went quiet for a second. Then he let out a low laugh, not mocking, but something she couldn't quite define. He's your mate, he repeated slowly. That's what he told you? Yes. Clarice. He said her name carefully, like someone about to say something that needed to land just right. She blinked, and then her knees gave out. Caspian moved before she hit the ground, his arms catching her before thought could, pulling her weight against his chest, his knee hitting the dirt to soften the fall. Clarice. She didn't respond. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow, her body completely limp in his arms. She had fainted. He knew of a cabin. It was nearby. A simple place,
bare of decoration, used by the Lupine Guard during training when they were in animal form and needed shelter before returning to the castle. He had been there dozens of times himself. It was the only place that made sense now. Caspian carried her. Naked, because there was no other option. With her in his arms and the dark forest around them, he made his way to the cabin without forced urgency, fast enough to get there quickly, careful enough not to jostle her. He pushed the door open with his shoulder. The inside was small, a narrow bed against the wall, an old armchair in the corner, a folded blanket draped over it. He laid Clarice on the bed with more care than he had used for anything in years, brushed her hair aside, and went to fetch water. There was a cloth folded on a shelf. He soaked it, wrung out the excess, and placed it on her forehead. Her skin was too warm. A cold sweat covered her face, her neck, her hands. Fever. He knelt beside the bed for a moment, his hand hovering near her face without touching, sensing. It was one of the things an alpha carried, the ability to feel beyond his own body, to sense the state of those around him when the bond was strong enough. And the bond with her, for reasons he had understood before he was ready to understand them, was too strong to ignore. He felt her fever, her body reacting to emotional shock, to the cold night air, to the exhaustion of holding everything in for so long. He felt the shame. That particular kind of shame of someone exposed in an intimate way. Someone who had guarded something precious only to see it thrown aside by someone who didn't deserve it. He felt the pain. Not the pain of someone who lost love. The pain of someone realizing that what she thought she had might never have existed the way she believed. Caspian looked at her for a long moment. Then he sent the thought, that silent communication lupine shifters used among themselves, clear and direct like a voice inside the mind. "I'll be away tonight. Don't worry. Only call if it's urgent." The nearest guard's response came instantly, without questions. "Understood, Your Majesty." He took the blanket from the chair and covered himself from the waist down. Then he stayed there, sitting on the edge of the bed, his hand resting lightly over hers, feeling the fever slowly begin to ease. If she only knew, he thought. The first thing Clarice felt was warmth, and then something solid, with a heartbeat. She opened her eyes slowly, her head throbbing, and stayed still for a moment, trying to understand where she was. The ceiling was low, made of dark wood. The light slipping through the crack in the window was the thin light of early dawn. Then she realized. She was lying on top of someone. She didn't move. Just stayed there, eyes open, her face resting against a chest that rose and fell with steady rhythm, her mind trying to piece together what had happened in the right order. The garden. Matthew. The cliff. Caspian. She should have gotten up immediately. She didn't. She stayed there, completely still, looking at his chest with an attention she hadn't planned on giving. His arms, his shoulders, the line of his neck. There was something in the way he was, completely relaxed, breathing deep and slow, that made it hard to look away. God. The thought came before she could stop it. What a body. Like what you see. Clarice jerked back so suddenly she nearly fell off the bed. Caspian's eyes were open, his face turned toward her, wearing that expression she already knew far too well. Calm on the outside, thoroughly amused on the inside. "I wasn't," she started. "You were." "I just woke up, I didn't even—" "You've been looking for quite a while, Clarice." Heat rushed up her neck. "Why are you not wearing anything?" she blurted, her voice coming out higher than she intended. "And why was I sleeping on your chest?" Caspian sat up slowly, the blanket slipping slightly from his waist, before he adjusted it with a calm she found almost criminal. "You fainted," he said simply. "And in case you don't remember, I was already naked when I found you at the cliff." Clarice covered her face with her hand. The shift. He had transformed to follow her through the forest,
reached her in his lupine form, shifted back, and she had been so lost in her pain she hadn't really looked at him, hadn't looked at anything. She had just fainted. She stopped. I didn't even notice. I know. Silence for a second, and then, without her permission, the words slipped out. That explains why you're so tall and big. She closed her mouth. Too late. Caspian went completely still for a moment. Then, I didn't know you found me attractive. His voice was low, almost amused. Clarice pressed her hand to her forehead. I didn't say that. You did. I didn't. I just woke up and... Clarisse. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes fixed on her. You were staring for quite a while. I wasn't. I know when you're lying. He said it calmly, like it was nothing, as if commenting on the weather. Heat flooded her neck again, and she dropped her gaze to her hands resting in her lap. She opened her mouth to respond, but he continued, his voice lowering slightly. I can hear your heartbeat. I can feel what you feel. His eyes settled on her directly, without hesitation. So there's no point. She looked at him for a moment, then looked away again, fingers tightening slightly over the fabric of her dress. I'm at a disadvantage, she said quietly. So am I. She looked back at him. He didn't explain. He stayed still for a moment, then stood up, the blanket secured at his waist, and walked to the small window of the cabin. He stood with his back to her, looking outside, and there was something in his shoulders she hadn't seen before. Do you really feel nothing for me? The question settled in the room with a weight she hadn't expected. Clarice remained seated at the edge of the bed, her fingers brushing together, her eyes lowered. How am I supposed to say I'm attracted to him? The thought turned slowly inside her, and behind it came others. Quiet, honest ones she had avoided asking herself, because they were far too inconvenient. Do I really love Matthew? After everything? Or was it just easier to believe I did because he was there, familiar, saying all the right things? She remembered. A night near the forest, the two of them hidden. His voice low, saying, You are my mate, Clarice. She had held on to that like certainty. Built things on top of it. But I was already starting to feel distant from him before the season even began. I was, and I pretended not to see it. You humans think too much, Caspian said without turning, and feel too little. She lifted her eyes. Shifters are complicated, she replied. I don't understand this instinct thing. That's because you think more than you feel. He turned. And there was something in the way he looked at her. Direct, unguarded, with that quiet intensity she had come to recognize as the most real version of him, that made her hold her breath. Clarice. His voice was firm, but careful underneath. You can't be Matthew's mate. She froze. Because you're mine. The cabin went completely silent. That's not possible, she said. It is. He took a step toward her. I knew from the moment of the presentation. Everyone was backing away from you, and I kept wondering why, until I recognized the scent. Fermented herbs, deliberately applied to make it unbearable. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. But at the same time, beneath all that, there was something else. Something no one else noticed because they were too busy covering their noses. He looked at her directly. Your real scent, Clarice. And it was so good I couldn't understand how everyone was stepping away while I wanted to get closer. My instinct knew before I did. Your scent is everything to me. Clarice stared at him. Matthew lied. His voice wasn't cruel, just direct, carrying the weariness of someone who had held on to a truth for too long. He went quiet for a moment. I saw it. The thought crossed his mind uninvited. Saw how much he wanted you and couldn't have you. Not the way he wanted. Not fully. And I understood it better than I should have, because I know exactly what it's like to want someone like that. He didn't say it out loud, but what he said next carried all of that underneath. Maybe he thought that by lying, he could finally have you for real. A brief pause. It's unbearable wanting someone who keeps looking at another man. Someone you know will one day belong to someone else, and that someone won't be you. He looked away for a second, as if letting the words settle before continuing. He didn't deserve what you saved for him. She didn't answer. He stood still for a moment, then said, quieter, more honest than anything he had said before. You're human. But you could at least feel some attraction toward me. Clarice looked at him. At his eyes, looking right back at her without hiding anything. And she told the truth. I do. Her voice came out small. I just don't know how to explain it. And I can't. She stopped, fingers tightening. I don't want to get hurt again. Not anytime soon. I'll just stay single forever. He stayed silent for a moment, then lowered his head slightly and walked to the cabin door. Opened it. Stood there with his back to her, looking at the moon still hanging pale above the trees. Silence stretched. I can wait, he said at last. Clarice watched his back. You have to choose a queen, she said. I'll talk to the council and deal with that. She stayed still, and then she felt it. It came slowly, like a tide. A sadness that wasn't hers. She recognized it because it didn't feel like her own. It was deeper, older, the kind of loneliness that came from carrying the weight of a kingdom alone for years. The sadness is his. Clarice stood, crossed the room without thinking, went to him, and wrapped her arms around him from behind, her face resting between his shoulders, eyes closed. He went still for a second, then turned within her embrace, slowly, carefully, until he was facing her. I don't want you feeling my sadness, Clarice. I didn't choose to feel it, she said, looking up at him. It just is. A pause. If I kiss you, she said more quietly, will it go away? He laughed. A real laugh, low, reaching his eyes. Then you'll feel something else. She looked at him for a second, then rose onto her toes and kissed him. It was soft at first. Just the contact, just the warmth. But he responded, and when he did, there was no longer softness in the sense of distance. His hand moved to her waist with a firmness that said more than words ever could, and Clarice felt a heat that made no reasonable sense. It wasn't the cabin. It wasn't the night. It was him. It was this. It was something she had been refusing to name ever since he sat beside her at that dinner and laughed with her for the first time. He pulled away first. We have to stop. I don't want to. Clarice. His voice was rough, his hand still at her waist. I'm going to wait for you. It doesn't have to be like this. She looked at him for a moment, then rested her forehead against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her. And they stayed like that, in silence, inside the small cabin, with the moon outside and the forest quiet around them. Morning came with cold light filtering through the window. They left the cabin side by side, following the trail back to the castle. Today is the last day, he said, without looking at her. The final ball. I have to choose someone. Clarice didn't respond. But I'm not choosing anyone. She felt it in her chest, his determination, steady and quiet, and beneath it, hidden, that same sadness from before. The closer we get, he continued, the more we'll feel each other. A pause. I wish I could be happy right now so you could be happy too, "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't apologize. You're not to blame for any of this." The castle appeared between the trees, and with it, a royal guard waiting at the entrance with the posture of someone who had stood there as long as necessary. "Forgive the interruption, Your Majesty." The guard inclined his head. "I brought appropriate clothing." Other guards waited further ahead. At the entrance of the castle, Caspian stopped, turned to her. "I need to take care of a few things," he said. She nodded. He stood still for a moment, then leaned in slightly and pressed a quick, warm kiss to her forehead, completely natural, as if it were something he had done for years. Clarisse remained standing at the entrance for a moment, her hand slowly rising to the spot where the kiss had landed. The final ball hall was different from anything that had come before. Fuller, brighter. The families had arrived, parents, siblings, uncles, pride written across their faces in that particular mix of hope and nervousness. More than 90 ladies had already been dismissed in the past days, released to be courted by the nobles of the court, and most had found companionship. The kingdom had fulfilled its promise for nearly all of them. 5 remained. Clarisse was one of them. She moved through the hall carrying that mixture of feelings she had learned to hold over the past weeks. Matthew's betrayal still alive, but more distant now, like embers after the flame dies down. What she felt for Caspian, something she still couldn't shape into words but too large to ignore. And a genuine happiness for the other ladies who had found what they came for. Then the council moved. Lord Edmund stepped into the center of the hall, and the general murmur faded until silence settled. "Your Majesty," he said, turning to Caspian, "the kingdom awaits." Caspian stood near the staircase, the posture of a king, the eyes she knew. He swept his gaze across the hall once, and stopped on her. Better this way, he thought. In front of everyone. The council won't interfere with my authority before the entire court. If I announced it beforehand, they would force me. Here, they can't. He took a deep breath. Clarisse stood across the hall among the other 4 ladies, her family just behind her. Her mother with shining eyes, her father wearing that smile she had known since childhood. They were so happy she was among the 5. So happy. She was on the verge of tears. He felt it, clear, unmistakable, without her knowing she was sending it. The regret, the desire, that large, frightened thing inside her looking at him and wanting something she hadn't yet allowed herself to fully want. "Clarisse, if you wanted it, I would claim you right now." And then, clear, direct, like a voice inside his own mind. "I want you so much." He froze completely. The bond between them had grown more than he realized. He had heard her thought so clearly, even from a distance. The entire hall waited in silence. Caspian looked at her one last time. "I claim Clarisse." Her name landed in the hall like a stone hitting water, the ripples spreading one by one. Silence turned into murmurs, murmurs into applause, and somewhere in the crowd someone shouted in excitement. Clarisse didn't move for a full second. He walked toward her. "Do you want to be my queen?" She looked at him, her face flushed, her eyes shining with everything she had tried to hide for weeks and could no longer contain. "Yes," she said. The applause grew louder. He leaned slightly closer, his lips near her ear. "Is it true that you want me?" Her face turned even redder. Then he looked at her directly, and there was something in his eyes, serious, present, more exposed than anything she had ever seen in him. And he said softly, "Give me your hand." She did. The claiming ritual was ancient, as old as the kingdom itself, as old as the first shifters who had founded it. Clarisse knew what came next. "I accept because I have no choice," she told herself. Because refusing now would be a scandal before the entire court, the families, the council. It would shame my family. But deep down, quiet and inconvenient, there was another answer. She didn't let it rise. He positioned himself in front of her, and their eyes met for a second. Deep, present, before he leaned in. His lips touched her neck first, warm, and then his teeth followed with a firm gentleness she hadn't expected. The heat came all at once, overwhelming, consuming, starting at her neck and spreading through every part of her without permission, without warning. But it wasn't just heat. It was something bigger, a strange, breathtaking sense of alignment, as if something inside her that had always been slightly off had finally settled into the right place. And then, the memories came. Fast, vivid, out of order. A boy with light hair running through stone corridors, laughing with a freedom the Alpha King she knew no longer had. A teenager standing before a tall window, looking out over the kingdom with the weight of someone who had just understood what it meant to inherit it all. Moments of loneliness she recognized because she had felt them in the cabin. His life, entire, pouring into her in seconds. Clarice held her breath. One soul, she thought, not entirely sure where the thought came from. When she looked at him, when her eyes met his, she felt a desire so sudden and so uncontrollable that it made her furious with herself in equal measure. No, not now. He looked at her with that infuriating calm of someone who knew exactly what was happening. "Don't forget," he murmured, just for her. "I feel it too. So if you don't control yourself, this is going to get complicated for both of us." "You're the one who claimed me," she replied, her voice not entirely steady. "I claimed you because you wanted it. I said I was going to stay single forever." Liar. She found her parents near the entrance of the hall, and her mother reached her first, arms open, pulling her into a tight embrace, and Clarice felt like she was 6 years old again. "I'm so proud of you," Isoud said, her voice trembling slightly. Her father waited his turn, and when it came, he hugged her with that steady strength that was uniquely his. "You know," he said, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, "your mother also took part in a claiming selection many years ago." Clarice pulled back slightly to look at him. "And it's a good thing the king back then didn't choose her," he continued, his eyes shifting to Isoud with that warmth that didn't need words. "Because I wouldn't know how to live without her." The knock on her chamber door came later, when the castle had grown quieter. Clarice opened it. Caspian stood on the other side. "Why did you claim me?" she asked before he could speak. "You said you would wait." "I thought we had already settled this teasing of yours," he said, stepping inside with that infuriating calm. "But you like it, don't you?" His eyes rested on her with a spark of amusement she couldn't ignore. "Admit it, Clarice. You want me. You can't even hide it anymore." "I was vulnerable," she said, straightening her posture. "I'm still the same as always." "Of course you are." "I am. You were the one who wanted more back at the cabin." She opened her mouth. "And you didn't," she said, her voice gaining strength. "You gave me a few kisses and pulled back." She crossed her arms. "I don't even think you know what—" He went still. She was about to continue. She had more words lined up, her argument ready, but he went still, and it intimidated her before anything else could come out. The shift was immediate, not anger, not threat, but something more primal than either. The aura of the Alpha King filled the room in a way that didn't need words, didn't need movement. It was a presence that simply pressed down on everything around it like weight, like gravity, something the body recognized before the mind could process it. Clarice felt it in her shoulders, in her chest, in the way her next words died in her throat before they could form. He took a step forward. Took her arm carefully but without hesitation, pressed her back against the wall, and his hand moved slowly along the side of her body, shoulder, waist, hip, with a deliberate slowness. His eyes locked onto hers. "What do you really want from me, Clarice?" She tried to breathe normally, didn't quite succeed. "I want you," she said before reason could step in. "I didn't hear you." She looked at him. "I want you. A lot." He leaned in slowly, his face close to hers, his lips almost touching hers, and stopped. Clarice waited. He didn't move. She tried to pull away. He didn't let her, just a slight movement of his head that said no. "Please," she whispered. "Are you begging?" "Yes." He leaned closer, his lips near her ear. "I told you you'd beg for me." "Low blow," she replied, her voice rough. "If I feel everything you feel, then you know exactly what I'm feeling right now." She did. And that night, finally, without defenses, without fermented herbs, without calculated distance, they belonged to each other for the first time.